symbolic day to do it. This is the first day of Black History Month. Booker is the second African-American candidate to jump into this Democratic primary after Senator Kamala Harris, and he is putting that heritage front and center in this race, not only because he will be targeting African-American voters, but because it is a key part of his own personal story. In an announcement video today, Booker nods to that history, his parents' struggle to buy a home in a white, affluent neighborhood, and a white lawyer who helped them to do so because he was inspired by Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. Booker says in his announcement video today that courage is contagious. As part of the optimistic message he is hoping to bring to this presidential primary, I want you to take a look at his announcement video.
I believe that we can build a country where no one is forgotten, no one is left behind, where parents can put food on the table, where there are good-paying jobs with good benefits in every neighborhood, where our criminal justice system keeps us safe instead of shuffling more children into cages and coffins, where we see the faces of our leaders on television and feel pride, not shame. It is not a matter of can we. It's a matter of do we have the collective will, the American will. I believe we do. Together, we will channel our common pain back into our common purpose. Together, America, we will rise. I'm Cory Booker, and I'm running for President of the United States of America.
So today, Cory Booker answering one question, will he run for president? And the next question, how will he fare in this crowded Democratic primary, one of the most diverse in history, if not the most diverse in history? One advantage he could have is that he has raw political talent that Democrats point to. One of the challenges, this is a year of the women candidates running. He's going to go on The View today for his first interview after he rolls out his campaign, and then off to Iowa, South Carolina, and New Hampshire in the weeks to come.
Rebecca Buck for us in New Jersey. Cory Booker announces he's running for president. Certainly one of the more anticipated announcements in this 2020 race. Let's bring in CNN senior political reporter Nia Malika Henderson, Van Jones, host of the Van Jones Show, Jackie Kucinich, Washington bureau chief for the Daily Beast, and John Avlon here as well. Van, I want to start with you here. Where does Cory Booker fit in this new crowded field? And I don't think it's any coincidence at all that Senator Booker is announcing on February 1st, the beginning of Black History Month, and some of his first radio interviews will be with the likes of Tom Joyner, an extremely, maybe the most popular African-American radio host.
Well, Tom Joyner, certainly that. First of all, I have to say I've known Cory Booker for almost 25 years. I graduated from Yale Law School in spring of '93. He showed up in the fall of '93 and took the entire law school over. I'm so glad I got out before the Cory Booker phenomenon took over Yale Law School. You have Bill Clinton and you have Cory Booker, the two people that had the biggest impact on that law school, just as raw political talents. He's a force to be reckoned with. Cory Booker is a force of nature. He has no one surprised that he's running because in some ways people have been telling him to run. So he's a very small guy. Don't forget, this guy left Yale Law School, could have gone anywhere in the world, went to Newark, New Jersey, moved basically into the poorest neighborhood, and began the most improbable climb from working with folks in housing projects, living in a housing project, to now running for president of the United States. He is not a normal person. He's not a normal candidate. He's somebody who brings an extra gear when it comes to energy and empathy, and you're going to see that through the rest of this campaign.
Nia, I heard you in the background there. As we heard, he's not a normal candidate, being described as well by Van there as a force of nature. What's your take? Where does he fit in now in this increasingly crowded field?
Yeah, I think Van hits on great points there. The energy, the enthusiasm, you can see it there in that introductory video. He's got the marching band there. It feels very young. It feels very now. It feels very fresh. Cory Booker is somebody who people have known about for years. If you go back to 2002, there was a New York Times magazine article that said he would likely be the first black president. That was in 2002. He, of course, now is trying to be the second black president. I think his path looks a lot like Obama's. And in many many ways, Kamala Harris's does too. This idea that you can do well with not only African American voters, but Latino voters as well, young voters, as well as women. I mean, these are people who are occupying the same lane in many ways, and it's not just because they're both African American. It's because they're fresh faces. It's because they've already sort of zeroed in on key constituencies and already have some sway with those constituencies. The interesting thing about Booker is that he was doing a lot of the things that we see Beto O'Rourke doing now, the things that we see AOC doing now as well. Heavy on Twitter, heavy on Instagram, heavy on that social media, and really energizing young folks. And we'll see if he can keep that kind of spirit alive in this campaign, because he has been around so long, if he can keep that freshness going forward in this race.
He's been around. His social media game, too, we should point out, has actually been around for a long time. I mean, he was early on in that.
Yeah. It was actually practically before social media, right? I mean, Cory Booker predates the social media game and then actually helped usher it in. Jackie, Rebecca Buck noted this is easily the most diverse candidate field we've ever seen. We can put up the pictures here so people can see of the people who've already announced and or are exploring. You have 5 women. You have, a Latino in Julian Castro. You have Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is gay. This is a very, very diverse field already.
Well, absolutely, and that's why. That's why we're talking a lot about lanes, right? Because we're going to have a lot of these candidates competing for the same people. You talk about Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. There's been reporting they've already been courting various members of the Black Caucus in the House. One of the things, though, Cory Booker has made criminal justice reform a part of his being, right? I mean, he just helped push it through the Senate. Kamala Harris that's going to be a big point of contention between the two of them because of her role as a prosecutor, as the AG when she was in California. I think we're going to hear a lot of exchanges between the two of them as we get a little further into this about that issue in particular, because that's going to be one of the ways they try to really separate themselves from in the lane that they're both in.
There's been a lot of talk about taking certain voting blocks, certain demographics for granted, as we know, over the last number of years. And John Avalon, one of the things that stood out to me, we were talking to Michael Smerconish just a short time ago and asking him what his listeners were saying about this growing field. And he was saying that people were calling in and saying, listen, I'm a minority caller, and I want you to know Kamala Harris should not be taking my vote for granted just because of who I am. And that's an important reminder, too, as we're seeing the courting is important, but let's not forget people are people, and they want more. They don't want just a one-dimensional candidate.
Of course, and I think it's time as a country we have this incredibly diverse field where, of the folks already running, the straight white guys are I think there's one candidate right now. And that speaks to the evolution of American politics and the Democratic Party. But it also speaks to, I think, the need to transcend our tribalism, and the ethnic and racial algebra of putting together coalitions doesn't work as so much as being a compelling candidate with a great message and a great record. And with Cory Booker, as you heard, Van say, this is someone who's been laden with great expectations from early on. I mean, people running for city council in Newark don't typically get New York Times profiles. They don't get an award-winning documentary, Street Fight, about their first mayoral race.
Non-successful.
Yes, non-successful. Right. Is a great doc. And so, you get a sense of that trajectory. And his record, he has executive experience. That's an important differentiator. We've got more mayors in the race right now, current and ex-mayors, than governors. And he has a strong record, brought a lot of attention and investment into Newark, lowered unemployment, lowered crime. But there was the criticism from his successor, then a city councilman, that you see the mayor more on Meet the Press than in the streets towards the end of his term. And so that's one of the things. He's been a media figurehead for so long. Can he keep that freshness and that energy? But he has a raw talent that really stands out in any political.
I actually think he backed off a lot of the media over the last 4 or 5 years in anticipation, I think, of getting in this race. And Van, you've been talking about, we were having this discussion about taking no one's votes for granted. I've heard you say that, many times here. No one should assume that any one voter or voting bloc is going to follow any one candidate for any one reason. Cory Booker, complicated, interesting, as you said. He also, if he's been criticized for something, it's for being too close to Wall Street, right? He is a senator from New Jersey. This is an interesting year to be running with Elizabeth Warren and others very critical of Wall Street. Cory Booker is someone who has been seen to be close to financial interests.
I think one of the reasons why, in addition to his personal passion for the issue, that he's leaned so hard on criminal justice reform is because it is, a very, very strong progressive value that rounds out the picture of Cory Booker. Cory Booker really was that guy who would, in the morning, he might be in a community center in Newark talking to the poorest kids in New Jersey, and then that afternoon he might be on Wall Street talking to some of the richest people in the world, and then back in Newark, and basically with the same message to both constituents. But if you just grab him on the Wall Street side, you can really do some damage to him with this new Democratic Party that does not like Wall Street, that really was born with Occupy Wall Street, saying 99% versus the 1%. Cory Booker can sometimes be characterized as being too close to that so-called 1%. This may not be the year for that. So you're going to see him go very hard with the black community, going to go very hard on criminal justice reform, going to go very hard on his kind of common touch, which he does have with ordinary people. But he is going to catch fire, and he's going to catch some flack from the left of our party.
And can I just say one thing, though? When you're mayor of Newark, he brought major investment into downtown Newark. That was part of his job, and it is hard to do. Big companies weren't coming into Newark, and he helped turn that around, and that involves reaching out to Wall Street and big corporations. So I think, that hit on him from the activist class. I get it, but he did his job as mayor in doing that outreach.
Yeah, he's gonna. There's an interview I think he gave in 2012, might have been on Meet the Press, where he criticizes the approach that the Obama campaign is making to Mitt Romney and sort of beating up on venture capitalists.
That's right.
And so that's going to come back to him. He called it nauseating the way that the Obama allies and Obama was attacking Mitt Romney. So that's certainly going to come back and haunt him. So we'll see how that plays. But on this stuff, he is somebody who's pretty electrifying. I think between him and Elizabeth Warren, those are the folks who really send sort of a buzz through the crowd. People want to touch them. People want to be around them. And that's something that I think that's going to serve him really well, particularly in a state like Iowa, particularly in a state like New Hampshire, where you are in those living rooms talking to people, telling your story and trying to connect with them. And we'll see what happens, obviously, in South Carolina with African-American women being a really important voting bloc there, as well as African-American men and white women as well. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, he's got to prove that he can do well with white voters. That's the way that Obama was able to persuade black voters that he could win a general election. So, that trip to Iowa for Cory Booker is going to be incredibly important, as well as the work that he's doing in South Carolina. He's already trying to amass a talented team down there. I've talked to folks down there. He's going to have a real blockbuster team in South Carolina, as well as the others.
Jackie, it's interesting, too. I mean, Iowa, obviously. We know Iowa's going to be on the stop, but Sherrod Brown in Iowa just talking about, trying to be the more populist candidate here if he decides to jump in. How much of that is a focus for these other candidates who are already in? This is really straddling a line between being that progressive part of the party, right? And not losing the appeal to a more mainstream voter, being a more populist candidate.
Yeah, it seems like Sherrod Brown is more in the Joe Biden category of a candidate. And because of that, he's reaching out to a lot of people who've walked away from the Democratic Party, which is kind of the old model, especially when you talk to some of the more progressive candidates. They want to build the base. They want to grow the base. They want to get more African Americans out. They want to get more young people out. Where Sherrod Brown seems to be appealing, not that he's not trying to appeal to those people, but he's appealing to, he's a Democrat from northeastern Ohio who opposed NAFTA. On the front end, it's those workers that their factories have closed, that Donald Trump won. He's trying to bring them back home to the Democratic Party. Whether he'll be able to do that is an open question.
But could a Cory Booker, too? I'm looking at more, can a Cory Booker bring those people back into the fold? What does he have that could win them over to his side?
That is an open question. It really is, and that's going to be to be one of his challenges.
It's interesting. One of the open questions is Democrats try to decide, just one second, Van, on what happened in 2016. What do you say more? Was it white working class in the upper Midwest who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton? Or was it the fact that turnout was dramatically down in Milwaukee and Philadelphia? And those are two different analyses of what went wrong in 16 and how candidates can try to bridge that gap and address those deficits.
Could be both, right? And that's what Sherrod Brown is trying to argue there. Sorry, Van, go ahead.
Van was.
Well, I was just going to say one thing. Well, one thing about Sherrod Brown is that he is an unusual candidate in that he's for the white working class, but he's never allowed himself to be defined by that. In that, when he talks about workers, he talks about African Americans, he talks about all kinds of different folks, and he was as you said, had the right position on everything from the war to right position for a liberal Democrat, from the war to women's issues, et cetera. I think Cory Booker he's not been tested yet in those waters, that sort of industrial heartland water. Can you see Cory Booker with a hard hat on and pull that off? I don't know. You haven't seen him try those kind of things yet. So that's going to be the big test for him. The other big test for him is, going into South Carolina, you're going to see a heavyweight battle between Kamala Harris and Cory Booker for the black vote.
And Biden, if Biden gets in too, I mean, Biden's got some real strong ties in South Carolina as well. He hasn't been as active down there already in terms of telling people what he's going to do and telling people to wait on the sidelines. I do think one of the things about Obama is he did have that ability to go into those working class, white working class communities, partly because he was in Illinois, he was a Midwesterner. But yeah, I mean, we covered him. He would go on factory floors and be very comfortable there. So he did very well with those workers. It doesn't take a white man, right, to be able to go in and talk to those Midwestern white working class folks in the Midwest.
It's a good point. And the last thing I will say on 2020 is it does seem to me, and Elizabeth Warren has indicated she's got a big announcement to make, it seems to me that these candidates or prospective candidates are beginning to think they have to get in soon if they're going to get in. Beto O'Rourke does an Oprah interview next week. I think every day, every few days, we're going to be hearing from more and more of them. All right, guys, stick around. We got a lot more to discuss.
President Trump talking to the New York Times, taking on the Russia probe, his definitive answer about his discussions with Roger Stone. Next.
This is CNN Breaking News.
In a new wide-ranging interview with the New York Times, President Trump talks about the Russia investigation that continues to loom over his presidency.
Well, he told the attorneys that I'm not a subject. I'm not a target of. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Did he say that about the SDNY investigation too?
About which?
The SDNY investigation, because there's two. There's Mueller and then there's the Cohen.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I don't know about.
Let's bring back John Avlon, Van Jones, Nia Malika Henderson, Jackie Kucinich. It was interesting, the word choice, right, that we can't ignore. Van, let's call on those law school credentials here. He's saying, I was told, Rosenstein, he said, actually told my attorneys, I was not a target, I'm not a subject. Those two words, very important. And just remind us, what's the difference?
Well, I mean, he's trying to say that he is not the target of a criminal investigation. He's not himself personally under threat of being indicted for crimes, even though, of course, the president, the Department of Justice has said it doesn't have the authority to do that. But first of all, just back up for 1 second. You got to give Trump some credit to have Maggie Haberman come into the office and talk to him. She has been one of the toughest critics of the administration. She somehow, I don't know what she's got. She's got 27 sources inside the building. I don't know how she does it. She gets stuff out of that building almost nobody else does. The last person you expect for him to sit down and talk to, he brings her in. And, she's tough on him and she grills him. But I just wanted to point out, when I heard that Maggie Haberman was going to the White House, I wasn't sure they're going to let her back out. She's been that tough on the president. So, congratulations to her to get that face-to-face interview on the record and on tape. But he's trying to squiggle and wiggle his way out and try to suggest that he's not in any harm, everything is fine, when in fact, even if you are not the direct target of a criminal investigation, you can still find all of your associates can be in a ton of trouble, and ultimately you can also get drug into trouble because what ultimately people say when they crack under pressure, when the actual targets crack under pressure, you can then find yourself in real trouble anyway.
And it was also interesting. I don't know whether he meant to say he was told he was not a subject of this investigation. Right. He slipped that in there. And the difference there is, target means they are investigating you and your criminal activity and, expecting to press charges. Subject means you may be involved in activity that they are investigating, but they don't have yet enough evidence to press charges against you. And then there's a discussion about whether a president could ever be the target of a criminal investigation because a president can't be indicted. All of that is open here. The most interesting thing he might have said there, Nia, was that I don't know if I'm the target or the subject of the investigation from the Southern District of New York, a federal investigation which is sending Michael Cohen to jail and which has already indicated in writing they think the president may have been involved in breaking campaign finance laws.
Yeah, and that's an investigation that not only involves Michael Cohen, it also involves the CFO from Donald Trump's organization. I think his name is Alan Weisselberg, as well as David Pecker, who's over the National Enquirer. It's hard to know what you can believe from this president because he tends to make things up. He obviously wants to make himself look good in this interview in front of Maggie Haberman, an interview interview that he, I think, requested, right, with the publisher. It was supposed to be off the record, and the publisher insisted that it wasn't going to be off the record. So, yeah, it's really hard to know. Every once in a while, maybe every 6 months or so, he does these kinds of interviews with the Washington Post, with the New York Times. But again, anything that comes out of his mouth, you really have to weigh against his enormous history of just making misstatements. I think the Washington Post has it's something like 8,000 at this point. So you kind of have to take what he says with a grain of salt. I mean, he talked about the national intelligence chiefs and seemingly made up a story that said they came to him and said that they were misquoted. I mean, that doesn't sound like something that actually happened. But again, it's Donald Trump's spin and his, again, odd relationship with the truth.
You know what's interesting? That there was not a lot of, as Maggie pointed out last night, she characterized it as not a lot of wiggle room when he was talking about specific events involving Roger Stone. He was very clear. I never spoke to Roger Stone about WikiLeaks. I didn't direct anyone to. That didn't leave, Jackie, a lot of wiggle room there, which normally we would see from the president, sort of peddling around things.
Probably because he doesn't have a lot of wiggle room. I think that's the only explanation. I mean, you've seen him both try to separate himself from Roger Stone and say he likes Roger Stone, and Roger Stone's been with him for a while, but he wasn't a campaign advisor, which we know isn't true. So it seems like Roger Stone is someone he's really having trouble figuring out where to position himself from. As you know, Roger Stone is again there today.
You know, let's just play the sound. I think we have the exchange about WikiLeaks. The reason this is an issue is because the indictment that came out against Roger Stone last week, there was a sentence which said that there was a senior Trump campaign official that was directed to make contact with Roger Stone about WikiLeaks. The question was directed by whom? And here the president's basically saying, not me. Listen.
Did you ever talk to him about WikiLeaks? Because that's
No.
You never had a conversation.
No, I didn't. I never did.
Did you ever tell him or other people to get in touch with him?
Never did.
I'm so glad we played the audio because the tone is so un-Trumpian. It's so calm, almost, in a very innocent choir boy style, as opposed to usually the president's got a flourish, right? I mean, he exaggerates. He goes P.T. Barnum and Carnival Barker. So this is different. The question is
not no collusion.
Yeah, exactly. Is this sincerity? Or is this trying to slip one by a la the Stormy Daniels denials? And, of course, it raises the question. If we take the president at his word, if you look at the Stone indictment, who could hand on that directive to a senior at either Trump or Manafort? If we take the president at word, it's not him. But, again, we rarely hear blanket denials that simply and never in that tone.
He also doesn't think Stone's going to flip on him because
That's exactly
Stone has said over and over again, you also saw in that interview, he talked about how Roger Stone isn't going to be coerced into lying about me or something like that. So he has that confidence that Stone's on his side, and which, perhaps also informs that.
And also, I will note this, that as powerful as Maggie is, lying to Maggie Haberman is not a crime.
No.
Lying under oath is a crime. So there's a different standard there doing an interview, although that was a flat denial. A lot of other news made here, including in terms of this negotiation going on to prevent another shutdown. The president made clear to Maggie and Peter Baker that he doesn't hold out much hope that this bipartisan group of Congress people are going to reach an agreement. And I don't even necessarily think he wants them to reach an agreement. Listen to what he says.
This is your first experience dealing with Nancy Pelosi having the gavel as the speaker. Do you feel that you properly estimated her strengths? Do you feel like you underestimated them?
I've actually always gotten along with her, but now I don't think I will anymore. I think that she's hurting the country very badly. I think Nancy Pelosi is hurting our country very badly by doing what she's doing. And ultimately, I think I've set the table very nicely.
Set the table for an emergency declaration.
I've set the table. I've set the stage for doing what I'm going to do.
Are you going to wait out for 21 days before you take it?
Yeah, I'm going to wait till the 15th. I think it's a waste of time.
I think it's a waste of time, Van. I set the table. It sounds like he's saying I set the table to just do this myself.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing is that the inability of the political class to resolve this question of immigration reform is actually having this background effect of more and more executive authority being gobbled up. the way that Obama chose, and I was for him doing this, to deal with the Dreamers, meant he grabbed a little bit more executive authority for himself than he had before. Now you're going to see Trump, to build the wall, go in the other direction, grab a little bit more executive authority than he had before, saying, I'm just going to declare national emergency. And when he says, I've been setting the table, he just has been saying, it's an emergency, it's an emergency, it's an emergency, and having enough of his people say it that he thinks he can go into court and say, well, we've established a record that it's an emergency because we call it an emergency. And then you're going to have the courts have to decide, do we want to get involved in this, or do we want to basically let the president of the United States use his quote-unquote emergency powers to do something that Congress has expressly decided they don't want to do yet? Well, so this is going to cause a constitutional crisis of some kind. And what I want to point out is that notice when you have a big problem like this and you cannot get it solved normally, then you begin to see extraordinary actions on the part of the executive branch, which ultimately hurts the country.
But one of the reasons this can't be solved in a conventional manner is because of the president, because no one feels like that anything negotiated inside the House and the Senate is going to be accepted by this president. So that in and of itself creates a really a tough mission for these Congress folks that no one really thinks that they're going to get anything done by the end of the day.
Although what's amazing is, and John and I spoke to them yesterday. We spoke to, a Republican and a Democrat. Those 17 seem to be the only people who are optimistic that something can happen, right? You have the president basically saying, this was never going to work. I was going to wait it out for 21 days. I'm going to do exactly what I need to do. I'm going to drum up support to say that this is an emergency. By the way, if it was an emergency, it would have been declared a long time ago if it was a real emergency. But you have, again, the lawmakers who are willing to do something. But to your point, it's leadership. And listen, Nancy Pelosi is coming out, too, and saying, I mean, she's not necessarily all behind this. Let's find a solution.
Members of the committee aren't going to come out and be like, hey, we're inept.
But no, they're not. But they didn't have to be. I don't think that they needed to be perhaps as optimistic as they were. No, they're not going to say
But
that.
we all know what a deal looks like. And the far left and the far right will be unhappy about it. But it will be some form of border security, including partial wall, for Dreamers' path to citizenship. That's what a deal looks like. And, Ann Coulter Co. will be upset. The far left will be upset. Can the president actually endorse that to get help?
Right. That's the real question.
And we know the answer to that. No. I mean, that was a deal that has been floated. And we know that he is mainly looking at Ann Coulter. The president finds himself in this position because he made a promise he could never keep, which is that he would build a wall from sea to shining sea, or shiny sea, he sometimes say, and that Mexico would pay for it. So now he's in this position where he's just going to declare a national emergency, most likely, and we'll see what the courts do, and we'll see what Republicans do as well.
All right, Jackie, Nia, Van, John, thank you very much. We talked to those optimistic members of the conference committee yesterday. That was before the president spoke.
Yes, it was.
I doubt they'd be all rainbows and unicorns this morning.
No, but you know what? You know what? They might be up for puppies. We have puppies later, so if you want a rainbow and a unicorn, you can't find one, stick with us. You'll get puppies.
Yeah. A shutdown coming, but we have puppies.
Yeah.
All right. Should Election Day be a federal holiday? Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is facing Democratic backlash after criticizing a House proposal to make Election Day a federal holiday. CNN senior political analyst John Avalon has a reality check.
If politicians can agree on one thing, it's usually that it's important to go out and vote. Now, that's why Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell drew fire and fury for mocking a House bill designed to open up our elections and increase voter participation.
Speaker Pelosi and her colleagues are advertising it as a package of urgent measures to save American democracy. A power grab that's smelling more and more like exactly what it is.
Look, Election Day is a power grab, but not like blocking a vote on a Supreme Court nominee. It's a power grab by the people to hold their politicians accountable. And this is often an uphill battle because of the obstacles intentionally put in their way. Look, these range from the rigged system of redistricting to rollback to the Voting Rights Act to archaic rules that tamp down turnout. And that's why the House bill seeks to make Election Day a federal holiday so more people can go out and vote. But McConnell really doesn't dig this idea.
A new paid holiday for government workers. Just what America needs. Another paid holiday and a bunch of government.
Okay, so two things. First, state workers in McConnell's native Kentucky already get presidential election days off. Second, this comes right after McConnell presided over the longest shutdown in government American history, which left hundreds of thousands without pay for weeks. But could it be that McConnell doesn't want more people to vote because he sees increased participation as a Democratic plot? Well, reminds me of an old Chris Rock line. Quote, they don't want you to vote. If they did, we wouldn't vote on a Tuesday in November. You ever throw a party on a Tuesday? No, because no one would come. So why else would Chicago hold its mayoral elections in freezing February? Or why would Georgia close its polls at 7 p.m. and Kentucky at 6 when many folks are just getting off work? Spoiler alert. It's about to make turnout smaller, more predictable, and more dependent upon hard partisans, which only further polarizes our politics. Now, you might be asking, why do we vote on Tuesday? Not a crazy question. It was from when farmers needed to take a day to take their horse and wagon into town and back, and no one wanted to travel on the Sabbath. Today, those reasons don't really apply. This House bill includes plenty of other changes, like outlawing the purging of voter rolls, killing gerrymandering by requiring independent redistricting commissions, and automatic voter registration. Now, McConnell is calling this the, quote, Democrat Politician Protection Act. It's an ironic twist, given that McConnell voted for LBJ in 1964 because he says he was so disappointed that Barry Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Act. Now, Johnson's support for civil rights and voting rights realigned American politics. But while McConnell has led Republicans in the Senate, there's been a steady erosion of voting rights. According to the Brennan Center, since 2010, no fewer than 25 states have put in place new voting restrictions. We should be making it easier for citizens to vote, not harder. And it shouldn't be a partisan issue. Ronald Reagan railed against redistricting, calling the right to vote, quote, the crown jewel of American liberties. So bottom line, folks, more voting, not less, is good for America, even Republicans. And that's your reality check.
All right, John, thank you very much.
A 3-year-old boy lost in the woods, found alive nearly 3 days after disappearing. CNN follows the heroic rescuers as they retrace. Sources telling CNN a second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un is being planned for the end of this month in Vietnam. The coastal city of Da Nang is the likely location. The president claims progress is being made toward the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Earlier this week, the director of national intelligence testified North Korea is unlikely to give up its nuclear weapons.
A letter containing a white powder was sent to the set of Empire days before one of the show's stars, Jussie Smollett, was allegedly attacked. But Chicago police say it was received last week at CineSpace Studios, where Empire is filmed. The powder turned out to be aspirin. Smollett says two attackers assaulted him and called him homophobic and racist slurs as he returned from an early morning trip to a sandwich shop.
A 3-year-old boy in North Carolina, missing for nearly 3 days in the rain and freezing temperatures, found alive. CNN's Bryn Gingras introduces us to the officers who went beyond the call of duty to find him.
Deep in this swath of pine trees, amongst the thorns and briars, a lost little boy was found.
It took some force to get him out of it. I actually had to pull him out of the vegetation.
Against all odds, 3-year-old Casey Hathaway was rescued 55 hours after he went missing from his great-grandmother's North Carolina home. It was a tip that led Greer to this very spot at the edge of the woods.
And that's when we heard him say, Mama.
Clear as day.
Clear as day.
Greer is one of hundreds of local and federal emergency responders who tirelessly searched for Casey through rain and freezing temperatures.
Casey's a small child. He's cold. He's hungry.
The massive operation was under the command of Craven County Sheriff Chip Hughes.
We started looking at the percentages of what is the chance a 3-year-old child in the elements with the wildlife that's in the area, bears, coyotes, is going to survive this. The odds were not in our favor.
It's a search that captivated the nation and brought a community together.
People were, when they showed up, you could see the look of determination. You know, Casey he belongs to all of us now.
All the while, Hughes promised Casey's family he'd bring their boy home.
That was a tall promise I made to this lady, and we were committed to stay to the end.
And you kept that in your mind, it sounds like.
Exactly. When the rescue pulled up, the doors opened, and I saw this, 25-pound child, 3-year-old there with his eyes open, big brown eyes. It was tear-jerking. This was when we made good on our promise. I would have stayed out there an entire year just to make that happen.
Casey's body temperature was low, but he only had scratches. He told his parents he befriended a bear. His family emotionally thanked law enforcement.
We're very thankful that you took the time out to come search for Casey and prayed for him.
As for Greer, he'll never forget that gratitude. He now keeps this picture in his office, a gift from Casey's family of Greer and the little boy he saved.
I think everybody at some point in time was expecting a real bad ending from this, and for the ending to be so good. I mean, you know, the little boy's at home because of the efforts that everybody did here.
A reminder of what he humbly calls a miracle. Bryn Gingras, CNN, Craven County, North Carolina.
You know, it's a reminder, these officers who are out there working day and night, they have kids too.
Absolutely.
I mean, they feel this.
Yeah, they get it. And you know what's nice too? So many times you see this, and as the days drag on, you never want to say it out loud, but your heart drops. And to have this 3-year-old boy be okay, they hear him calling for his mom, to have him be home safe and sound now, it's the good news that we all need.
It's why you don't give up.
He spent 4 months behind bars as a political prisoner in Venezuela. Now he is free, talking about the humanitarian crisis there as he prepares to meet with Vice President Pence